Why didn't James VI of Scotland, later James I of England, save his mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, from execution? Mary, Queen of Scots, was imprisoned in England for 19 years by her cousin Elizabeth I. But in 1586, Mary was convicted for her involvement in the Babington plot, which aimed to murder Elizabeth I and put Mary on the throne instead. So she was convicted and she was sentenced to death. But what did James VI of Scotland think about this, and did he do anything to save his mother? James was 19 years old and he was King of Scotland, and he'd done very little to actually try and save his mother from imprisonment for the last 19 years. But being sentenced to death was a whole different ballgame. In 1585, so the year before, James had started a correspondence with Elizabeth I, who was then 55 years old. They wrote their letters themselves and they tried to constantly stress their friendship and alliance. So obviously there's that kinship between them, they were related, but James was also quite calculating in that he wanted to ensure that he was going to be the next in line to the English throne. But when Elizabeth was about to execute his mother, he was in something of a moral quandary. He obviously wanted to protect his mother even though he was estranged from her, but he did not want to anger Elizabeth I because he wanted to be King of England. In 1587, so the following year after Mary was convicted, James wrote a letter to Elizabeth protesting the death sentence that had been put onto his mother. And in this letter, although he maintains the appearance of kinship and friendship, he is definitely protesting what Elizabeth is doing. He wants her to change her mind. He actually begins the letter as Madame and dearest sister. He questions Elizabeth. He asks her, what right does she have to put to death another sovereign prince anointed by God? He says it like this: "What thing, madame, can greatly touch me in honour that is a king and a son, than that my nearest neighbour," so Elizabeth, "being in straightest friendship with me, shall rigorously put to death a free sovereign prince, and my natural mother." He goes on, he says, "What law of God can commit that justice shall strike upon them whom he has appointed supreme dispensators of the same under him?" He's basically saying, you are appointed by God, but so is my mother, and you do not have that jurisdiction to kill another prince. He goes on to Elizabeth and tries to persuade her that the honour she will receive from the other princes from sparing his mother will be great indeed. But of course, these protests, which were quite heartfelt, fell on deaf ears with Elizabeth. But unfortunately, this letter did nothing to dissuade Elizabeth, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed the next month by beheading on the 8th of February. So why didn't James do more than simply write a letter? He had an army at his disposal, so why didn't he use it? James was pretty aware that to break with England, so to actually march on England and try and save his mother, could only be politically feasible if he was allied with Catholic Spain. He needed some muscle behind his threats, and he just didn't have that. He was also seen as quite a young king, green, untried, and so not really a threat. In his letters, he actually assured Elizabeth that Elizabeth's life was no less dear than his own mother's. So you can see how he wasn't really hell-bent on saving his mother. He was doing it because it was politically correct to protest. But I think overall he was just very much concerned about making sure that he did not scupper his chances about inheriting the very rich and wealthy state of England when Elizabeth died. And so as a result, James did not want to anger Elizabeth or her ministers, because in the future he was going to have to work with those same men to ensure that he became the King of England. And apparently, when James heard of the execution of his mother, he received the news calmly. He didn't actually do anything. He didn't raise an army. He wasn't angry. He just received that news calmly. And we have to remember that he actually hadn't seen his mother since he was 10 months old. So she was a very distant figure to him. But what do you think? Do you think that James should have done more? Did he act correctly? Or was he just self